Well, in the beginning, it's all nice and dandy. They had a great idea. Look what came from it eventually. However, Todd, you got to give him credit for trying.
The man had no idea who he was talking to when he mocked Tony Beets at 35,000 feet. In the quiet luxury of first class, where every seat cost more than most people made in a month, Greg sat feeling smug about his lucky upgrade. How could one careless insult turn a peaceful flight into a moment no one would forget? Tune in, because what happened next left Greg so impressed that he resigned from his job and asked Tony for a position. A first-class ticket to the wrong fight. That was when he noticed the man a few rows ahead. Unlike the others, this guy looked out of place. He wasn't draped in designer clothes or flexing a watch that cost as much as a car. His hands, rough, calloused, the hands of a man who worked for his wealth, rested heavily on the armrests. His boots, worn from years of real labor, told a story that no high-end loafer ever could. Greg squinted. There was something familiar about him. Before we dive into this, one thing is certain. Greg had just made a mistake far bigger than he could ever realize, and the fallout would be nothing short of unforgettable. Then it clicked. Tony Beets, the gold miner, the man from Gold Rush, the guy who built an empire in the dirt while barely tolerating anyone who got in his way. Not the kind of refined billionaire expected in first class. A working-class millionaire? That didn't fit the picture. Feeling emboldened by the bubbles in his glass and the thrill of sitting among the elite, he let his mouth get ahead of his common sense. Didn't think they let gold diggers fly first class. The moment stretched longer than it should have. A few heads turned, subtle movements of people pretending not to listen. The flight attendant pouring wine hesitated, as if debating whether to finish the pour or retreat. The polished, high-class atmosphere suddenly felt sharp, like the crack before a storm. Tony didn't react right away. He just sat there staring ahead, but the weight of his silence was louder than words. Then slowly he turned his head, locking his gaze onto the one who had spoken with the kind of look that could make a grown man rethink his entire existence. A mistake had been made. For all the bravado, the wrong person had been underestimated. Tony Beets wasn't the type to throw a fit over an insult. He wasn't about to start yelling or demanding respect. He had something far worse: presence, the kind that made a person shrink in their seat without a single word being spoken. The impact was immediate. The subtle shift in the air, the way people around seemed to distance themselves without moving. This wasn't just some loud-mouthed TV personality. This was a man who had built a fortune with his bare hands. Calling him a gold digger, like it was an insult, only proved how little was understood. Gold miners weren't the ones who sat in ivory towers, shifting money around on paper and calling it work. They faced brutal winters, broken equipment, exhaustion, and the constant uncertainty that the next day could bring ruin. Tony Beets had done what most men wouldn't even dare to try. He gambled on the earth itself and won. And here was someone who had lucked into a fancy seat, thinking it was their right to mock that. The attempt at humor had backfired spectacularly. Expecting laughter, maybe a nod from the businessmen nearby, instead there was only silence. The realization hit. This wasn't punching up. This was punching straight into irrelevance. Tony didn't even need to say anything. His entire existence was an answer to the insult. The flight continued, but enjoyment was no longer possible. Every sip of champagne felt sour. Every bite of the overpriced meal turned to ash. The goal had been to feel important, to prove belonging. Instead, only smallness had been proven. That sinking, gut-twisting realization set in. This wasn't just a little slip-up, not just an awkward moment that would fade. No, this was different. A foolish remark had been made in front of Tony Beets, a man who didn't tolerate nonsense, let alone disrespect. He wasn't some soft corporate type, the kind who settled things with emails and forced smiles. He was a man carved out of the toughest places on earth, someone who had built his success with calloused hands and sheer force of will. He had faced bigger threats and walked away unbothered every single time. Tony didn't need to say a word, but what happened next made everything even clearer. The silence that ended the conversation. A cocky grin faltered for just a second, but the damage was done. Tony didn't react, didn't even blink. He just leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, eyes steady. And that silence? It wasn't indifference. It was a warning. The whole plane seemed to shift, the energy in the air changing. No one spoke, no one moved. Even the flight attendants suddenly seemed far too busy with everything except their passengers. Now, feeling the weight of the mistake, there was a sudden interest in the melting ice in the glass, as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. The flight dragged on, but something had changed. Tony wasn't the type to explode in anger or start a scene, and somehow that made it worse. There was something in his presence, something unshakable, something that made it clear without a doubt that a step had been taken into the deep end. Fire had been played with, and now came the slow burn of arrogance backfiring. The other passengers knew it too. They stole glances, whispering without words, their expressions full of something difficult to stomach. Pity. No longer the bold, confident figure enjoying a first-class flight. Just a fool who had misread the room. And this room belonged to Tony Beets. The hours ticked by, each minute stretching longer than the last. Shifting in the seat, trying to lose focus in an in-flight movie, but every scene blurred together. There was no real watching. How could there be? That weight, that unspoken truth pressed down with every moment. Tony wasn't just another rich guy. He wasn't someone who had simply bought his way into this seat. He had earned it. And the man who had spoken, he was playing pretend. Then came the moment that sealed it all. A flight attendant approached Tony with a polite but obvious admiration in her voice. "Mr. Beets, the captain wanted to let you know, if you'd like, you're welcome to visit the cockpit when we land. He's a big fan of Gold Rush." A small nod from Tony. That'd be nice. Stomach twisting. It wasn't just the passengers, it wasn't just the crew. Tony Beets had the captain of the entire plane tipping his hat to him. The man flying them across the ocean wasn't thinking about anyone else. He wasn't offering anything to anyone else. And in that moment, it all clicked. Respect wasn't about money. It wasn't about where wealth came from or how expensive a suit was. It was about something deeper, about the kind of person someone was, about the way they carried themselves, about the things they had endured and come out stronger for. Tony Beets had earned everything, not just his success, but the respect that followed him wherever he went. And the man who had spoken, he had just exposed himself as a fraud. As the wheels touched down and the plane taxied to a stop, a desperate need to escape took hold. Avoiding Tony's direction, grabbing a bag with shaky hands. Boarding this flight had been about belonging, about standing on equal footing with a man like Tony Beets. But now, stepping into the aisle, there was no high-powered businessman, no self-made success. Just someone who had mistaken wealth for worth and in doing so, had made a fool of himself. Tony Beets didn't need to say a word, he had already won. Before he became a gold mining legend, Tony Beets was just a farm boy who refused to stay stuck in the life he was born into. From the fields to the goldfields. Tony Beets wasn't born into a life of comfort. He came into the world on December 15, 1959, in a quiet corner of the Netherlands called Wijndens. His childhood wasn't about play or leisure. It was about getting up early, working hard on the family farm, and understanding that if you wanted something, you had to earn it. Life didn't hand out favors, and he learned that young. By the time he reached adulthood, staying in the Netherlands wasn't an option. Farming was all he knew, but he saw no future in it. In 1980, with nothing but grit and a willingness to grind, he packed up and headed to Canada. He started off milking cows in British Columbia, but it didn't take long for him to realize that this wasn't the life he wanted either. He wanted something bigger, something that could actually change his future. Then he heard whispers about gold up in the Yukon. The idea of striking it rich was all it took. He made the move in 1984, determined to make something of himself. Landing in Dawson City was no fairy tale. It was cold, brutal, and filled with men who had the same dream: dig in the dirt, pull out gold, and change their lives forever. He wasn't afraid of hard work, but even he had no idea what he was walking into. He took a job running machines at a gold mine, putting in long hours and learning everything he could. He wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the fastest, but he had something better, a relentless drive. If a machine broke, he figured out how to fix it. If the ground wasn't yielding gold, he learned how to read it better. He absorbed everything like a sponge, and by 1986, he was ready to go out on his own. Starting a mining company from nothing is no easy feat. Tamarack Inc. was born, a name that would later become legendary in the Yukon. In the beginning, it was a grind. The cold was unforgiving, the equipment barely held together, and there were days he wasn't sure if he'd even break even. But giving up wasn't an option. Every dollar he made, he put right back into the business. He bought better machines, expanded his claims, and kept pushing forward. The setbacks were constant. Weather, breakdowns, bad ground, but nothing was going to stop him. Then came television. In 2010, he and his family appeared on the second season of Gold Rush. Unlike the others, he didn't come off as some starry-eyed dreamer hoping to strike gold overnight. He was direct, ruthless, and didn't care about feelings. His no-nonsense attitude made him stand out. Viewers either loved him or hated him, but no one ignored him. His mining claim, Paradise Hill, became one of the most recognizable spots on the show. He didn't just play the game, he rewrote the rules. While most miners played it safe, he made moves that had people shaking their heads. One of his biggest gambles was buying an old dredge on Clear Creek. Everyone thought he was crazy. Dredges hadn't been used in decades, and bringing one back to life was no small task, but he didn't care what anyone thought. He believed that if he could get it running, he could make more money than any of his competitors. It was a huge risk, one that required time, money, and sheer willpower. Whether it paid off or not, one thing was clear: he was not afraid to bet big. But it wasn't just about him. His family was at the core of everything he did. He married Minnie in 1984, and she became more than just a partner. She was the backbone of the business. She handled the money, the paperwork, and kept everything running smoothly while he focused on the ground. Their kids grew up in the business, learning firsthand what it meant to work hard. Unlike other mining families, the Beets clan wasn't just along for the ride, they were in the thick of it, running machines, managing crews, and making sure their name stayed on top. Years passed, and the operation grew beyond anything he could have imagined. What started as a small gamble in the Yukon turned into one of the biggest mining operations in the region. He secured multiple claims, amassed a fleet of heavy-duty machines, and solidified his place as one of the most successful miners in the industry. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it was sheer force of will. And through it all, he remained the same, brash, bold, and unwilling to take no for an answer. Whether it was tearing apart a machine with his bare hands or making a deal that seemed impossible, he did things his way. He didn't care about being liked, he cared about results. And that mindset took him from a struggling farm kid in the Netherlands to a Yukon legend. Even now, he keeps pushing. The gold game is always changing, and he refuses to be left behind. He explores new technologies, experiments with different mining methods, and never stops looking for the next big claim. His past proves one thing: Tony Beets isn't the kind of man who slows down. He didn't come all this way just to sit back and watch. He came to win, and he's not done yet. Fixing old machines to dig up gold was just the start, because when Tony Beets takes a risk, he goes all in. A miner who refuses to lose. Tony Beets is not just another miner on Gold Rush, he's the loudest, toughest, and most relentless prospector out there. From the moment he stepped onto the Klondike, he made it clear he wasn't playing around. While other miners stressed over broken equipment and missed deadlines, he thrived in chaos, bulldozing his way through setbacks like a man who simply refuses to lose. His best moments, well, they aren't just about striking gold. They're about proving time and time again that no one does it quite like Tony Beets. One of his most talked about feats came when he decided to bring a gigantic old dredge back to life. Most people would look at a rusted-out behemoth and see a scrap heap. He saw a challenge. It was an all-or-nothing gamble, requiring endless hours, massive resources, and enough patience to make a saint snap. But when that beast roared back to life, it changed everything. It wasn't just about the gold, though plenty of that came pouring in. It was about showing the world that he could take something abandoned and make it work better than ever. The process wasn't smooth, of course. Moving a dredge is like trying to transport a small city through the wilderness, but he made it happen, because that's just what he does. And then there was the time he did it all over again. Yes, one dredge wasn't enough. While others were upgrading to fancy new gear, he was out there digging up history and turning it into profit. This second dredge, even bigger and meaner, was another test of his sheer will. If the first one had been a wild ride, this was a full-blown roller coaster without brakes. And somehow, against all odds, he pulled it off again, proving that old-school mining still had a place in the modern world, at least when he was in charge. Gold mining isn't just about digging, it's about survival, and he has faced some brutal seasons. One year, he set a sky-high goal: pull in 6,000 ounces of gold. Ambitious? Absolutely. Did everything go smoothly? Not a chance. The weather was unforgiving, machines broke down at the worst times, and the gold just wasn't flowing like he'd hoped. He still managed to haul in over 4,000 ounces though, which would have been a massive success for anyone else. But for him, it was a bitter pill. The guy doesn't just aim high, he expects to hit his mark every time, and when he doesn't, it only makes him push harder. Then came the time he was forced to move his entire operation. A water lease expiration threatened to shut him down, and most miners would have been scrambling for backup plans. He simply packed up and moved. Paradise Hill became his new battleground, and despite all the logistical nightmares, he still managed to pull in over 2,000 ounces of gold. It was a masterclass in adaptation, proving that even when the odds are stacked against him, he finds a way to keep the gold flowing. But the biggest challenge of all? Mining in the middle of a global crisis. When the world shut down, he and his family didn't stop. They locked themselves in at their mine, pushing forward while everyone else hit pause. No outsiders, no easy resupplies, just him and his crew battling through one of the toughest seasons they'd ever faced. It wasn't just about mining at that point, it was about proving that nothing, not even a worldwide shutdown, could stop him from chasing gold. Every year he ups the ante, refusing to settle for anything less than total domination. Equipment fails, weather turns, and obstacles keep piling up, but he powers through with that same unbreakable drive. Even when everything seems stacked against him, he keeps going, never letting setbacks define his legacy. And now, with whispers of an even bigger move, possibly uprooting his entire operation to the Indian River, one thing is clear: Tony Beets isn't slowing down anytime soon. The real question is, will anything ever be enough for him? Will he finally hit that perfect season where nothing goes wrong, or is he destined to keep pushing the limits forever? If there's one thing we know, it's that when he is on the hunt for gold, the fight is far from over. Did Greg make a simple mistake, or did he underestimate the power and reputation of Tony Beets? Some say respect is earned, while others believe it should be demanded. Where do you stand? Was this just an awkward moment, or did Greg learn a lesson he'll never forget? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.